Chapter 14. Breaking and Entering. A pair of slightly wedged denim legs dangled from the small window of the diminutive thatched cottage. In the night air, Mason whispered loudly, "Almost there! I just need a little push!" Blaine understood, grabbing Mason's heels, one in each hand, and raised his arms above his head. Underestimating his strength, Mason was sent flying by Blaine to the other side onto the plush brown carpet, like a pile of post pushed through a letterbox by a heavy-handed postman. Unlocking the old-fashioned iron bolts on the door, one at the top and another at the bottom, he then proceeded to turn to the main security lock, before pulling down on the handle, allowing Blaine entry into the property. Pushing the door open wide, he wiped away the mountain of accumulated letters and junk mail like a snowplow. Then, closing the door quickly and quietly behind them, careful not to arouse any suspicions, they ventured further in to investigate Horseshoe Cottage. With a curfew in place, the boys had concocted and given alibis to their respective parents that they were at each other's houses and they would get a lift back. Their parents would never know what they had planned. A ghostly blue glow emanated from the boys' mobile phones as they made their way to search for anything out of the ordinary that the police may have failed to spot. They could see the back door had been boarded up as they entered the compact kitchen. The crunching noise of broken glass could be heard whenever they moved in the vicinity of the door. Mason deduced that this must have been where the police had entered. The whole house was silent and still as they crept around. As the two boys investigated further, Blaine's mobile phone light cut out as it went into sleep mode. Not looking where he was going, he checked his phone and pushed a button to re-illuminate it, and in doing so, he was struck on the head. There was a crashing sound as he grabbed his forehead, sending sturdy metal objects hurtling to the hard tile floor, creating a chaotic orchestra of percussion. "What on earth was that?" Mason asked, panic-stricken. Blaine's phone suddenly came back on, blinding him temporarily. Mason pointed his light in Blaine's direction and saw kitchen utensils and other cooking receptacles scattered across the floor. Blaine, being tall, had walked headfirst into a rack of suspended pots and pans. Blaine wondered, "What's this? Maid's day off?" It appeared that no one had bothered to do the washing up. Mason scanned the other side of the kitchen with his light. "More like maid's decade off," he replied. He noticed that the whole kitchen table was dirty. There were numerously weird-shaped cobwebs draped over the door frames, and in between the painted white banister rails of the stairs. "So where's our third musketeer?" Blaine asked as they started to open cabinet doors, shining their lights to search the contents. Mason answered, "I don't know. She said she would meet us here, but I guess she's chickened out." It wasn't hard to miss finding anything out of the ordinary as they scrutinized the cabinets, as there wasn't any. All the cupboards were totally void of any foodstuff, and the only item left was an out-of-date tub of baking powder, which had expired 2 years ago. Moving on to the next room, Blaine removed throws to check underneath, but only found furniture riddled with rips and cat claw marks. The curtains, shredded and chewed, had met the same fate as the sofa and chairs. As Blaine ran his fingers along the fireplace, he felt his fingertips become dry as they became coated in a thick layer of dust. "I don't think she's ever dusted in her life. No matter how many joss sticks she burnt, I guess they never gave her the inspiration to do any housework." Picking up a china ornament, Blaine looked at it closely to see it was a figurine of 2 tabby cats side by side with their tails joined together in the shape of a love heart. With his fingers still dusty, the ornament slipped from his grasp and landed on the concrete slabs of the fireplace and smashed with a high-pitched clink. "Sorry," Blaine said apologetically, bending down to retrieve the pieces, hoping it had only broken in 2 and could easily be replaced above the fire so no one would notice. As he reached out his hand to steady himself in order to salvage the scattered fragments, he felt a strange indentation on the wall. Shining his phone's light, he said, worried, Mason? You might want to look at this." Carved into the stone wall were peculiar divots that looked just like teeth and claw marks. Pleased their suspicions were correct and something else had been there after all, shock overcame them, the whites of their eyes reflecting in the lights as they froze, when they heard a rumbling noise beating through the floor coming from upstairs. The dark, narrow staircase suddenly looked rather foreboding, as the amateur detective duo snuck gingerly across the living room, back towards the front door. They were almost there when Blaine clumsily whacked his shin on the low coffee table. "Ow! Damn it!" he yelled. "Shh!" Mason pleaded, and they both froze like statues once again, holding their breath, careful not to make a single sound. The rumbling from above grew louder. Blaine could sense Mason's look of disappointment on his face, even though they were in darkness, and said, "Do you think it heard us?" Mason sarcastically commented, "I don't know, Blaine. Maybe you should shout up the stairs and ask it." The rumbling sound vigorously ricocheted, and in a shock decision, Mason stunned Blaine. "Let's go up. Whatever it is, it sounds like it's trapped." "When my brother hit you, are you sure you didn't suffer any brain trauma?" Blaine said, dumbfounded. Placing his hand on the banister rail, Mason climbed onto the first step and beckoned, "Come on! This could be our only chance to find out what is really going on." Before Blaine could argue, Mason had already crept halfway up the staircase. "Stick to the sides of the stairs," Mason educated Blaine. "It's quieter. It's what all good thieves do." Blaine replied in a less than confident voice, "Really, Mason? How many thieves do you actually know?" The suspicious noise was coming from the furthest room at the end of the creaky landing. Turning the doorknob as slowly as possible, the catch clicked, and the door was pushed open a crack, allowing Mason just enough room to peer inside with one eye, to see what was making the ruckus. The curtains were pulled, the window was open, and a small amount of light shone from outside, illuminating the ominous bedroom. Opening the gap wider, but still cautious, ready to jump back and slam the solid door shut if necessary, he craned his neck slowly around the edge. Swinging it completely open, both boys cautiously walked in. Blaine spied a hairbrush on a bedside table and picked it up, just in case he could use it as a weapon. Next to it was a large fancy welded brass key, and what looked to be a hand-carved ivory music box. Circling the room, they looked under the double bed, behind the door, and noticed only one place left to inspect: the tall, antique wooden wardrobe. Reaching out to pull the metal handle, the boys had their backs towards the window as a pair of beady dark eyes landed and began to intensely gaze upon them, silently from the bed. Both sensing they were being watched, they turned simultaneously in slow motion and were met with a loud bone-chilling craw. The two best friends screamed and leapt into each other's arms as a jet-black crow took off above their heads and then headed out of the window. In an awkward, humiliated embrace, the cuddling friends couldn't believe how scared and embarrassed they were as they uncoupled from their hold and leant against the wardrobe door, arguing which one of them screamed most like a girl. Laughing at each other, a loud ear-piercing bang thumped from inside the wardrobe, sending vibrations through the door and shivers down their spines, making them leap in the direction of the bed and scream even louder and even higher as the pair was shaken again. Through all the hysterics, Mason noticed something odd had changed in the room. "Not again," he commented, realizing. He got up to open the wardrobe, but as he pressed in the catch underneath the handle, the door wouldn't budge. "What are you doing?" Blaine demanded, clutching hold of the hairbrush for dear life. Mason saw the elegantly made key on the bedside table, retrieved it, placed it in the keyhole of the wardrobe, and turned it until he heard the click of the lock. Blaine shut one eye while squinting from the other as the old door creaked open, launching a familiar red-haired projectile straight into his arms. Chloe's face was burrowed deep in Mason's chest. She looked up and couldn't help but smile as her face went bright pink. "Oh good, I finally made it to the right place. I must have made a couple of wrong turns and ended up startling some panic-stricken old women." Mason said nothing, looked around and shrugged, denying all knowledge of his and Blaine's cowardly shame. "Wait a minute," Blaine said, still nervous, clutching the hairbrush. "Chloe pops out of a wardrobe, with the door and every other entrance locked in this place? And you're okay with that?" Looking at Chloe, Mason self-righteously replied, "Oh yeah, I forgot he doesn't know." "Well, it is your power. I guess you should tell him," exacting his revenge for not letting him help name her gift. "How did you know it was me in the wardrobe?" Chloe wondered. "Honestly," Mason said, "the smell. Did you bathe in treacle? No wonder your mum can tell when you smuggle sweets in the house. You reek of sugar." Oblivious to this knowledge, Chloe was unsure whether to take offence or not. So how did you get in here? Blaine interrupted, demanding, tired of waiting for the other two to decide who was going to tell him. Well, you know when the school caretaker found me at school and everyone thought Hunter shut me in my locker? Blaine nodded, hanging on every word, not wanting to miss a single detail. It turns out all I have to do is want to be somewhere really bad, and I can teleport through a shadow to that destination, but only within a certain distance. I call it gloomgating. Blaine turned straight to Mason, making sure the pair of them weren't playing a practical joke. Mason stood there, straight-faced, as Chloe walked behind the door and jumped out behind him, re-emerging from the back of the wardrobe. That is so cool, Blaine gasped in sheer amazement, and demanded she do it again, at least 5 or 6 times more. But one thing, Blaine said. That name is terrible. Why don't you call it shadowporting? Flaring her nostrils as Mason smirked and chuckled, Chloe gave in to peer pressure and snapped, Fine, I shadowport. Are you both happy now? She stormed onto the landing as Blaine looked confused, not knowing what he had said wrong. Following the walking teleporting tantrum, the 2 boys caught up with her. After Chloe had a chance to cool down, she informed her crime-busting partners that the reason she was late was that no matter how hard she wanted to come here, she kept on ending up in Mason's attic. Repeating himself again, Mason desperately wanted to know something. Seriously, what is the big deal with my attic? On the spot, she made up a story, not wanting Mason to understand she had feelings for him, and she thought about him most of the time, even when she didn't realize she was. Chloe managed to convince him it was because her teleporting powers couldn't distinguish between meeting Mason the individual and his home, as they technically were both Masons, one in the same place. Blaine, still in an amazed tone, inquired, Chloe, have you heard? Mason's dad's going to renovate their attic into a chill-out room, just for him, and he's getting a foosball table. Smiling back, Chloe replied happily, Oh, I like foosball. That sounds nice. Not believing how unstealthily his team were, Mason said under his voice in a muffled tone, Come on, guys. We're breaking and entering here. Can we please focus? As Mason entered the second bedroom, Blaine whispered, correcting himself as quietly as he could, Oh, maybe he's not allowed to get a foosball table anymore. Chloe followed behind him frowning, genuinely disappointed. The second bedroom's primary function appeared to be Miss Cockleton's dressing room. Skeleton frames of 2 clothing rails stood completely empty, barren of clothing, and the young detectives could see how the police had come to their conclusions. Blaine and Mason were beginning to accept the ordinary truth that she had just run away with the money. But surely the house is worth more than what she stole, Mason observed. Chloe informed them, I spoke with my mum earlier, and she said that this is an old farmhand's cottage, and Miss Cockleton only rents the cottage. It actually belongs to Mrs. Scrace. So she did take the money and run, Blaine said, relieved that the case had been solved. Tired and now bored after the adrenaline had drained from his system, Blaine yawned, and stretching out his arms, he lowered them to his side and unintentionally hit the light switch, and the room lit up with a bedazzling flash. Squinting, adjusting their eyes, Mason yelled, Turn them off, quick! Anxious that this would attract unwanted attention. Blaine just stared through them at the corners of the room. What in the world? Turning to see what had captivated their friend, they too were shocked to see all the cobwebs around the room, but each and every one of these webs was a different shade of colour. Some were even 2 tones, and others were just as yellow as Mrs. McQueen's car. Hoping that no one had seen the light from the window and phoned the police, Mason reached over and turned the light off. We've searched everywhere. We should just go. The woman used to paint her own cobwebs. This is too freaky, even for her. Reconvening at the top of the stairs, Blaine noticed, There's one place we haven't looked yet, pointing his finger straight up in the direction of the hatch in the ceiling. But it was too high, and the cord to pull down the ladder was frayed and appeared to have been cut. There was no way of getting up there. Then the 2 boys had the same thought and turned towards Chloe. I really don't want to go up there, Chloe said, frightened. With one eyebrow raised, Mason said, encouraging her, Yeah, but you do love attics. Under pressure, Chloe found it difficult to shadowport, especially due to the fact, in order for her gift to work, she had to really want to go to that location, and even though she told herself she did, she kept ending up teleporting from a shadow of a bush in the back garden, and then having to locate a shadow back inside the house. After her 12th attempt, Mason heard creaking boards above his head, followed by a bang, and Chloe cursing, acknowledging she had successfully made it. It only took Chloe 30 seconds before she rematerialized from the biggest bedroom at the end of the hall, and informed them, still annoyed she had to go up there in the first place, but it was a waste of time, and it was as empty as the biscuit barrel in her house. "Are we done with the investigation?" Chloe asked, wanting to go home, as the cottage was beginning to give her the creeps. But as she left to go down the stairs, Blaine and Mason held out their phones, shining them onto her back. Seeing this, she froze as she heard their signs of worry. "Get it off! Get it off!" she rambled, panicking, but as she descended, the thing on her back slid off and draped itself out, almost flat, at the top of the stairs. Gathering around to inspect Chloe's hitchhiker, they shone their lights and gasped as they discovered Miss Cockleton, well, her skin at least, lying motionless like a Halloween costume. Chloe thought she might be sick, as the human suit wobbled whenever Blaine started to poke and prod it with the handle of the hairbrush. Mrs. Grace was right. It is aliens. That's how they walk around undetected, Mason assumed. They killed her and then impersonated our art teacher. Chloe looked doubtful and presumed whatever did this probably wanted the missing money, letting on what she eavesdropped earlier at school. Just before classes had ended that same day, the headmaster, Mr. Rowland, had received an unexpected telephone call from the local hospital. Thinking it was the police informing him Miss Cockleton had been found injured, he was shocked to find the caller on the other end of the line was Mrs. Grace, asking when the missing art teacher was bringing the money, as her husband would not allow her to purchase her new photography equipment for her next fad-like endeavour until she had sold the kiln and other redundant art supplies. "It's such a shame about her pottery venture," Chloe said gloomily. "I thought she had found her true calling. Her little ashtrays were really quite good." All the while the two boys looked, stunned at Chloe. "I thought everyone knew that Miss Cockleton was getting the kiln from her," remembering the occasion when she'd awoken in Mrs. Grace's garden shed, surrounded by her ceramic collection and dusty aprons. She was certain she would have been able to sneak back home undetected before anyone noticed, if only it wasn't for one Bernard the cat discovering her, blowing her cover, meowing loudly enough to alert Mrs. Grace to the trespasser, which led her getting into more trouble with her parents. The gang pondered all the evidence. The shell-like skin proved Miss Cockleton hadn't left the country in a rush. It looked as though someone had staged the scene, removing all her clothing, disposed of the remains of the body in the attic, and then cut the cord pull string on purpose, so that no one would find it. Her missing cats were probably linked to the mysterious attacker as well. She was telling the truth. She had found a new kiln for the school, but was unable to deliver the money. Something had stopped her and hollowed her out from the inside. Or maybe Miss Cockleton had been missing for ages, and it was an imposter the whole time that set her up and took the money. "She did have enemies," Blaine said. "Olivia Davenport has mentioned countless times her lessons were criminal, and she needed to be stopped." Thinking it through, he added, "But she was attacked at my party, so it can't be her. But then there's the obvious, Mr. Tyler. He really hated her." Considering the list of suspects, Chloe was taking into account what she had been told by her mother over the years, and what she had overheard Miss Cockleton and Hunter talking about. Suddenly, the two histories crossed paths, and came to a hurtling collision in her mind, intertwining, giving her the complete picture. Chloe gulped, just before she revealed, "Someone else used to rent this cottage, that used to work for Farmer Tinker. That means we're standing in the house where Brian Headcase Harrington once lived."